the first summer after my first year at Graduate Theological Union, I came home to Salt Lake and went to my old student ward, where by chance I ran into Keith Norman, whose name I recognized from the New England Mission. We had both been there at the same time. And I was just excited to discover that Keith was attending the Harvard Divinity School at the same time I was at GTU. We began to compare notes, and we were both just so excited about what we were learning that we said, well, we ought to share with each other our discoveries. So we ought to correspond. And then I thought, well, I have my other friends here in Salt Lake who'd be interested in those things as well. And we talked about it and said, well, maybe we should have a chain letter or mimeograph some pages and send them to one another. So I went back to Berkeley with that in mind, and somehow, like Topsy, Sunstone grew. Let's see.
So was it always from the start conceived to be a magazine? When did it, or a journal? When did it go from some letters to actual publication?
It just grew. When we had a first meeting of 6 people in the Erickson cabin in Mill Creek Canyon. And among the 6 were my present wife, Susan Hobson, and Peggy Fletcher, her cousin Doug Bennett, Julie Christensen, a fellow named, and a couple of others whose name I can't remember right at this point.
Okay, do that again, but just...
Our initial meeting was in the Erickson cabin in Mill Creek Canyon. We had 6 people come, including Susan Hobson, whom I married in '77, Peggy Fletcher, her cousin Doug Bennett, Julie Christensen, and a couple of others. And it was during that time that we started thinking about maybe expanding it into a publication. I went back to GTU. Doug Bennett took charge initially, and I was on the periphery. We had had a hard time coming up with a name, and for the first several weeks that seemed to be the only thing we could talk about. Someone suggested Stradivarius, another one Chrysalis, or I wanted to go with Rough Draft because one of the things that I didn't want to have was competition with dialogue. I felt that dialogue was so professional that it would intimidate authors such as myself who were students, who were just investigating. We weren't accomplished in our field, and we wanted people to participate without feeling intimidated or stupid.
So what type of tone were you striving for?
Well, I was striving for exactly that, kind of a rough draft, informal sharing of experiences and discoveries. So it was considered originally to be essentially a graduate student or publication. We finally came up with the name Whetstone as a kind of a pioneer image, but also indicating that it was kind of a refining instrument, not to be taken as the final word. Maria Humphrey, who played a very important part at the beginning, and I went down to Los Angeles to meet with Bob Reese and a couple of other dialogue people. And Bob pointed out that Whetstone may not be the best choice because it portrayed the image of people sharpening their knives to stab the church in its back. We immediately saw, of course, that he was right, and he suggested the name Sunstone, which everyone immediately agreed with. It wasn't long before it became clear that the people in Berkeley were more committed to the project than most of the people in Salt Lake. Fortunately, Peggy Fletcher came out in 1974 and 75 to Graduate Theological Union, and essentially she and I and Maria and some others started the foundation and the genesis of Sunstone. Susan had made a calendar for me of Mormon history pictures a year or two before, and we thought that producing such a calendar would help us raise some funds, which it did. In the winter, in December, I came home, and Maria Humphrey drove the calendars, which had just come off the press, through the night, through a blizzard, to deliver the calendars to us for sale. They arrived on the 23rd of December. And I immediately took a stack of them over to our local Albertsons grocery store and began hawking them from a card table. One particular person who seemed to be very interested, and I actually even excited when I told her about what we were doing, said, "Just a minute, my husband's got to hear this." And she ran off and pretty soon brought her husband back, who introduced himself as Gene England. I was just floored and so excited to meet him, and asked if he would be willing to come over and meet some of the Salt Lake people who are helping out on getting the magazine started here. And he did, and came over to my folks' house, and we had a wonderful session with him. It was really inspirational, and Gene has been a real Sunstone supporter from the very beginning.
So, why did you feel like a magazine like Sunstone was important, and what role did you see it playing in the church? You can treat those as separate questions, but...
The student ward program, which is very important to me at the University of Utah, was drastically changed shortly after I left Salt Lake. We viewed it as an attempt to spread out the coals, the burning embers within the church, so that it was viewed as a fairly liberal institution which wasn't really under control. And I wanted to keep that spirit alive within the church. And so that was the main impetus, was to keep the flame burning. And what it could do for the church.
Which flame? Keep which flame burning?
Well, the flame goes back to what I consider the early days of the church, when there was a lot of speculation and personal interpretation and give and take theologically, but particularly with my grandfather, who attended a conference at the Brigham Young College where B.H. Roberts spoke. And B.H. Roberts said that it was as important for our young people to go away to get educated as it was for them to go on missions. And that was what induced grandfather to go to the University of Chicago. And he represented the liberal element of the church. When I came to Salt Lake to work on what I at the time thought would be a dissertation, Leonard Arrington offered me a fellowship, and one of the things that he asked me to do was a history of the Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association. It was at that point that I really became familiar with grandfather's religious views. Until that time, my father had asked him not to discuss religion with me. And so it was after his death that I really became familiar with his thought, and found his thought and his feelings remarkably similar to my own. He went through a lot on the MIA General Board, and it was that flame, I think, that I wanted to keep going. Grandfather's protégés included Sterling McMurrin and Obert C. Tanner. And it was that kind of spirit and thought, intellectual integrity in the church, that I wanted to see continued.
It's very good. So your grandfather was a contemporary of Sterling McMurrin and O.C. Tanner?
Grandfather was his mentor. Sterling McMurrin took classes from him.
Oh.
And the University of Utah later created a chair in philosophy called the E.E. Erickson Chair of Philosophy. And Sterling McMurrin was the first to hold that position.
Oh, outstanding. Okay. So what were were there some issues that you decided needed to be tackled during your tenure? Were there some definitive papers that needed to get written? Was there an edition or two of the magazine that really represented what you were hoping, or something that you're particularly proud of? Tell us about any of the people, articles, or issues that you think, in your eyes, you're either proud of or you think were modestly significant to Mormon studies or to Mormon thinking.
I think at the beginning, the whole emphasis was on being a democratic, non-elitist organization. And so we sought papers from students, and unfortunately they weren't really worth a lot from a literary or scholarship standpoint. But the idea was to be diverse, and hence the subtitle or the tagline, Mormon Experience, Scholarship, Issues, and Art. And we wanted to have a broad appeal and a broad, expansive view of Mormonism. And so perhaps that was the biggest mistake that I made, was encouraging people to take charge of their own issue. That is public. It was a quarterly at the time. So we exchanged responsibilities with one another. We weren't terribly concerned about being consistent or establishing a brand, but we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to do, in effect, their own thing. So there was a lot of inconsistency, but that was intentional. Some of the most important people in those early years were Elizabeth Shaw and Scott Card, who I met while they were, I guess, student interns at Brigham Young University, BYU Studies. Lavina Fielding Anderson was also very important, helping us with editing and generating manuscripts. She was working for the Ensign at the time, and we I've lost it. Ask me another question.
Oh, that's good. Wait, keep going.
Some of the early issues that I was frankly quite proud of. The first issue contained a lot. It was full color. We had an article on stained glass windows, which were just beautiful in LDS chapels. The fourth issue was on, the first issue also included the full play called Fires of the Mind. The fourth issue was devoted to Mormon artists and was really in full color again, and was really a gorgeous issue. We were also very interested in history, and were fortunate enough to have Alan Roberts, who became a member of the board, write some articles on Mormon architecture. Among the early authors were Mike Quinn, Carl Sandburg, Scott Card, Alan Roberts, and we had a lot of input from people in the church historical department, particularly Jill Durr and Maureen Ursenbach Beecher. The first year after we had decided while she was at GTU, Peggy Fletcher worked. Okay. At GTU, Peggy Fletcher worked very hard on the publication. She was full of energy and enthusiasm and brought a lot of people into the organization, a lot of subscribers, sold a lot of calendars, just did everything that could be done, really, and was really the important spark plug of the organization. Others who became important were Elizabeth Shaw and Scott Card, who were student interns, I believe, at BYU Studies at the time. They helped generate manuscripts and edit them. And in our early issues, we had people like Mike Quinn, Alan Roberts, Carl Sandburg, all important contributors. The first issue, I think, set the tone for us in the early days. We happened to get a designer named Dave Cannon, who was starting out in his career in Provo, was an excellent designer and gave us really a much higher quality feel and look than we had anticipated, and really helped us go a more professional route than simply mimeographed. So we wanted to emphasize 4 aspects of Mormonism: Mormon experience, scholarship, issues, and art. We wanted to have a broad scope. And so in our first issue, for example, we published a full-length play, Fires of the Mind, and an article on stained glass windows in Mormon chapels. Alan Roberts did an article on Mormon architecture. In the 4th issue was devoted to, the primary article was devoted to Mormon artists. It was just a gorgeous issue. We were publishing in 4-color. And now I've forgotten where I was going.
That's good. That was very good. Any other authors that you were going to try and mention? You said Michael Quinn before. Any other historians? Let me stop and start. Okay.
Our first issue, designed by Dave Kenney, featured stained glass windows. It was a full-color issue, and we were very happy with it. It included Fires of the Mind, a play, and Alan Roberts did a terrific job on the stained glass windows. He also wrote an article on pioneer architects in the 2nd issue. Other important contributors, the very first issues included Mike Quinn, Carl Sandburg, Lavina Fielding Anderson, Scott Card, Maureen Ursenbach Beecher. The first issue came out in the fall of 1975. We had about 600 subscribers from an initial mailing of the dialogue subscribers of 10,000 names. So we were encouraged at the beginning, and over time things became more financially difficult. No one was paid, of course. All of the money went into the publication and mailing. But by the fall of 1977, we'd fallen on hard times. Kevin Barnhurst had started a publication called Messenger and Advocate, and he volunteered to join and combine publications. They weren't the best issues. They were actually rather highly criticized. We went to a magazine format, and the number of pages were smaller, and people thought that, well, we were struggling. But one thing Kevin did bring to the orientation was that we should have articles about current events. And that, of course, has become so important in Sunstone, and one of the most important contributions that the publication has made. Kevin Barnhurst had a publication called Messenger and Advocate, and he suggested that we combine publications. He volunteered to take over the next issue. We went to a magazine format. He introduced the idea of adding current events to the publication, which has been one of the most important contributions that Sunstone has made. Here are a couple of paintings featured in that 4th issue. Here are a couple of pages from the 4th issue, one by James Christensen, the other by Harrison Groudage. I believe at this time this was the first full-color article on Mormon art that had been done in Mormon periodicals. In the fall of 1977, Kevin Barnhurst joined the group and proposed that we go to a magazine format and that we include news articles. This is a very important contribution that Kevin made, and it became one of the most important features, I think, of Sunstone. Sunstone, by the summer of 1978, I was fairly well burned out. We were also running short of funds. So I called the board of directors together and said, look, I don't know where you want to go with this. I can't continue. If you think you want to keep going with this, I'll be glad to turn it over to some of you and be glad to help you with anything I can to keep it going. Otherwise, I think we should close the operations down, and I'll stay long enough so that people will feel all right about our ending financially. At that point, Peggy Fletcher and Alan Roberts really stepped up to the plate and took over the magazine and developed the idea of a symposium. The symposium is probably more important to the mission of Sunstone than even the publication, although I think the website has enormous potential for growth and opportunity to bring people together that have never been done before. And that is bringing people together and sharing experiences, really the original impetus of the publication. And the symposium and the website are more effectively doing that than receiving a magazine in the mail every couple of months could ever do. Better stop that. Sunstone is crucial to the future of Mormonism in its intellectual environment and social contact. A few years ago, Elder Dallin Oaks gave a conference talk in which he warned members of the church against alternate voices. And he had in mind, I think it was obvious to everyone, Sunstone, Dialogue, other publications. To me, this represents the crux of the issue. Elder Oaks and many other Orthodox members of the church feel that the communication should be from the top down, and that in our discussions in our church classes, in church doctrine and priesthood and Relief Society meetings, that if we follow the manual and read the same questions and give the appropriate answers, that all the thinking has been done. And in fact, that's not reality. Mormonism is has a widely diverse population membership. People are going to think differently. They need to feel that they can express themselves freely, honestly, and openly, that they can share their doubts and their questions with others who are not going to put them down or make them feel guilty for having the questions and thoughts that they have. Sunstone fulfills that mission, I believe, more than any other institution. And we need to keep that spirit alive in the church. It invigorates the membership. It keeps people in the church and while they are going through transitions, whether they are coming back into the church or in effect on their way out of the church, they need to have an environment where they feel safe and welcome.
Things to help in the church. Who are the people that maybe need Sunstone most? What types of people?
Sunstone plays an important role.
Say it again, 'cause
yeah.
That's okay.
Sunstone plays an important role. It gives people with questions or maybe even doubts and people who are excited about things that they want to share, important discoveries or experiences in their lives that build testimonies, or people who want to ask questions about things that they don't understand. Sunstone is important to provide the environment where that can take place without people feeling
No, it's okay.
Just don't start it yet.
So it's the 21st century. Maybe people are different now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. Is Sunstone still relevant in the modern times? Is there still a need in 2007? Or should we say that in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, Sunstone had its place, but it's no longer as essential today as it was back then?
The world's a different place now than it was in the early 70s. We were really in the sexual revolution and the period of turmoil. Vietnam was still going on. Watergate was happening. And this is a completely different world now. And in that sense, the need is different, the change is different, but the mission is still the same. And that is to give people an opportunity, to give them a forum where they feel comfortable sharing their experiences, and their questions and their doubts and their inspirational testimonies.
That's good. I just did that on camera. Say that again.
You really want me to put in that kind of questioning?
No, I mean, it can't hurt.
Sunstone began in the Watergate era, during Vietnam, political activism. There was a lot of sense that we could change the world. I don't know that Sunstone has done that, probably never will, but there needs to be a place for that small portion of people who are willing to think independently, to share their experiences, their questions, their doubts, their inspirational testimonies, without feeling that they need to conform, that they need to fit in, that they need to adapt what's really going on in their hearts to what will be approved, either by general authorities or family or anyone else, that they can be themselves. I think that will never change. And although the circumstances of the world, the social environment has changed, I believe that Sunstone is important in fulfilling that mission.
Are you proud of your role in helping to create Sunstone and what it became?
I don't know that proud is the word. I feel honored and really blessed because of what Sunstone has done, particularly after I left. It was up to Peggy and Alan and Elbert and Dan to bring Sunstone, to have Sunstone accomplish what I had hoped to do through a periodical. I just feel blessed to have been able to participate in it and to be associated with it even now. It's really one of the most important things that ever happened to me.